Oi, what's up? It's Demented, and today I have another retrospective that I already kind of did not too long ago on Shock versus Outlaws, I believe. But with that, I really wanted to kind of, I guess, bring up another one that I was super interested in, being Hunters versus Dragons. And there's still another one that I really want to at least look into a little bit, being Gladiators versus Fuel. But I'm not 100% gonna make a video, so just as a little preface for that. And even though I did a retrospective on the Shock versus Outlaws earlier this week, I wanted to reconstruct it a little bit because in this Hunters versus Dragons, I hadn't watched the whole thing very much in depth. I was sleep deprived and I was just happy to see Hunters winning. But ultimately I wasn't watching it with the intent of making a video on it. So I just went back and watched for probably a good 2 or 3 hours, and I now have a fully outlined script of pretty much all the points that I want to hit. So this is going to be a little bit different, but this is also going to be me going map by map, what I saw, what I think really was making such a huge impact. Because if you did not watch that series, please go watch it. It was very dominant from the Hunters, but I'm hoping that I can give you some clarity on why. And as per usual, I'm gonna try to stay unbiased in this, but if you heard my last video on Shock vs. Outlaws, even though I keep fucking plugging it, I did say that Hunters are my favorite team currently, so obviously I'm gonna have a little bit of bias towards them, but I'm gonna try to squash that and just kind of talk about the matches. So it all started on Oasis, specifically City Center, and what I saw, and I kind of took this by a like fight by fight basis, and hopefully this kind of makes sense going throughout the entire thing. And then I think towards the end I'm actually going to like re-wrap everything up and you know, bring up a couple extra points that I think overall. So starting on Oasis, the Dragons favored ball out of the gate, which I thought was super interesting for like almost no reason, because there's not really any like you don't really play ball into a lot of things that are being played right now. It's very susceptible to just like getting spammed out. If the other team's playing brawl, you just can't do really anything like besides roll in and hope you don't get one shot. It's also worth noting that on City Center specifically, the tempo control that I saw from the Dragons was just overall really poor. In terms of Chengdu was always able to fight on their terms when they wanted, and that also I guess kind of goes into what comp they were running, because I believe they were running like a Tracer Sombra with dive tanks and a Zen Brig backline into double bubble, which inherently just loses. And there's another point that I'll bring up later about I guess more of why they just kind of lose that fight. But overall, like, you're not gonna dive a Kree on a Brig just in the core, let alone the actual Zarya bubble that's going to pocket said individual that gets dove. You just can't do that. That's very hard to pull off. Don't be fooled though, this map did go to 99 to 99, but from what I saw, all the fights the Dragons were winning were for the most part really scrappy and one-off mechanics. For instance, I think Fleta got a 2k pulse bomb, which, you know, sure, fucking that's really cool and all, but obviously it wasn't good enough to win the series or even a map. And as I said before, the Hunters were really good about taking fights on their own terms and being able to kind of set the tempo and set the pace on their own time. One time where this wasn't the case though was, I believe, the very last fight regardless, where I think Hunters were at around 90% and the Dragons were also closing in on around 90%, and they overextended really hard in their spawn for an EMP. But the counter EMP that came out was, I think, really fucking huge, and overall was a great thing that I saw on this map and the next one that I'll mention then. It's also worth mentioning that in the very last fight, Nisha did incredible at staying slippery and very, like, I guess maintaining their value as Brig and really staying alive just to make sure that you know, you could fully close out the fight and that you didn't have to go for some like insane plays or anything. All that needed was just to chill the fuck out. You win over time regardless. It's also worth mentioning that Izayaki played Moira, and it's kind of a win condition in itself, if you ask me. Going back to what I was saying earlier in terms of the difference in comp, what Hunters kept running, and this bleeds over into the second map, which is Gardens, they ran more consistent damage, in my opinion, in terms of running Kree and in terms of running Pharah, because with those two picks, you're constantly outputting damage, as opposed to Dragons, who, if you're playing a you know, a Sombra Tracer, you have to be really coordinated, because your damage isn't that, like, your damage and I guess your damage mixed with your uptime, it doesn't really, like, merge that well, I guess. You're not really able to have that much uptime, so that's why you have to go for quick dives, and they have to be precise, and everyone has to be on the same target. But if a Pharah gets thrown into the mix, and like anytime you're trying to dive something while you're in your little poke phase, you know, their Pharah is up in the sky like on a timer ready to like fucking shoot your ass down. Like, you are getting pressured the entire time, as opposed to like very small pockets that you're trying to win. Also, something that I noticed that was really interesting was there were a couple of times where Gaga was able to get really free slams off, and Lip would rather value building EMP than going for, as Avril would put it, manual hacks onto the ball. In terms of, if you get a hack on a ball that just finished an engagement, odds are the ball is going to be directly in your team and is super punishable. So I don't really know why you would value EMP over that, but that's kind of what Lip is known for. And once again on this map, Hunters did a really good job of setting tempo and knowing where they wanted to hit them, how they wanted to hit them. And you know, I think there was one time where Gaga overextended with mines, and even though he died, the rest of the Hunters were able to chill, wait for him to get back, and then re-engage still on their own terms. It's also worth mentioning that it took Fleta literally the point getting to, I believe, 67% cap percentage before they swapped to Kree, and then even then you're now having what I believe was either Ball or Monkey Diva with Sombra and a very stationary backline. You are literally one pick away from being double bubble, which is miles better than what you're running currently. And it makes, still, like, as I'm saying this and after my script has been done, I still have no clue or answer as to why they just wouldn't run Zarya, but this is a very consistent thing that you'll see throughout the entire series. Lastly, the counter EMP once again, which I think actually should be a really good thing that other teams start to take note of, is something that's been evident of the way that Lip plays Sombra. Everyone has looked at Lip and been like, holy shit, this guy builds EMPs like a motherfucker, but always wastes them. But every time Lip goes for an EMP, and everyone assumes that it's obviously going to be a good EMP, right? So if EMP comes out, if you're playing to counter EMP that, you're going to get massive value, and miles more value than Lip is going to. And so I guess my biggest takeaway from Oasis is definitely the whole counter EMPing shtick, as well as just, I guess, the less or lack of adaptability from the Dragons, because it really seemed like they were just out of their element, that they weren't ready to, you know, swap to double bubble. They weren't ready to, like, they had nothing prepared for double bubble. Moving on to Eichenwald, which is our second map of the series, Dragons favored Brawl instead of double bubble, which on first I can kind of understand, until I start to unravel how badly they really played it. So something worth mentioning in this particular comp or particular brawl comp that they ran, they played Reaper over Mei, which in turn you get a really big buff to your damage in all the damage that your core really can like project onto a singular individual. But at the same time, you're now losing that utility and losing the sometimes even a win condition that is a Mei wall. So for the first few fights, and something that I noticed was fairly consistent, was that every time that the dragons should walk in, there was always Gaga and Jinmu like moving in immediately as soon as the brawl core of dragons would try to push the backline, or the core, as I like to call it, of the hunters, being the Kree, Zarya, and then backline. Every time that they got pushed by the entire brawl comp, Jinmu and Gaga immediately went to start like cleaving in Gaga's case, and in Jinmu's case just hard spamming. And on top of that, they were getting shot by the turret nearly the entire time, which also it took until like the very last fight for the turret to even die, which is interesting to say the least. But also Chengdu's core did a really fucking good job of kiting the aggression that was, I guess, presented to them by the dragons, and overall they just played, especially the first fight, was played very well. The second fight got a little rocky because Gaga and Jinmu, I believe, got picked. So even though those two got picked, there were so many points of pressure, being a, you know, an angle from Leave, an angle from Monk looking for a nade, the angle that Elsa would keep, as well as kind of just having Nisha anchor somewhere, was phenomenal, to say the least. It was so well executed in my eyes, of seeing how pressured the dragons would really seem and how overwhelmed they got over time. It's also worth mentioning that in between fights, there were a bunch of times where hunters would just be able to reset back up wherever the fuck they wanted, because of how long dragons were taking to re-engage and to like actually get going. Like there would be really long periods of time in between fights, which, I mean, I guess I can understand if you're like really needing a regroup, but there were a lot of times that they were 6 and just kind of sitting there, and it really started to cost them. It was also really strange to me that on Eichenwald, dragons never thought of going right side up the staircase and going directly behind the entire illusion that is, I guess the call out for it is computers. They never thought to just go around it or to go literally anywhere else other than directly through it. And there were even times where they were so panicked at not knowing where to go that it would literally just get them picked in the neutral. There was also a fight where dragons, I believe, had to commit about, I believe, every ult that they had, almost 4 ults, all in one fight. But the, I guess, main thing that really turned that fight in the Hunter's favor was Void and Fleta getting split. Because if you take the, not only the Diva and get the defense matrix out of there, but the defense matrix as well as Reaper, who you literally are picking to have more power in your, like, in your punch of your brawl, if you take both of those out of the equation, you just get walked on. And that's definitely what happened here, because they got, I believe, Grav Torbolted, which was not even that effective, but it still just clapped because they, like, dragons couldn't do anything. They lost all of their, all of the power in their punch, which really sucks, but I mean, it's ultimately their misplay. And it was very obvious to me that Fleta wasn't getting a lot of value off of Reaper, solely because it took him 2.5 minutes to build a Death Blossom that lasted about less than a half a second. Also, Izayaki went Moira again. Not a good sign. And after that 2.5 minute Death Blossom, Gaga got so fucking pissed that Fleta wasn't doing his job that he literally took it upon himself to, like, long dick style, walk into his backline, primal, and kill 3. If that is, like, absolute alpha material, I don't know what the fuck is, man. And due to the lack of Death Blossom, with it lasting less than half a second, and their aggression getting kited out from them going into computers once again, which is the room in the close left if you don't know, like, they just ran out of steam incredibly fast and ended up taking a really staggered fight, and that's what lost them the attack. So after the side switched, I kind of started coming to terms with the fact that dragons are completely allergic to double bubble, considering that they literally were running Monkey, Diva, I believe Ash with Echo, and it was either Zen or Ana, I'm not too sure, but Jesus, dude, like, they're literally playing comps that are begging to become double bubble and are literally a Zarya away. I don't know if Void just really doesn't feel like playing Zarya or what, but that really needs to change, because at this point now they're 2 for 2 on losing maps solely because they're refusing to run a Zarya, in my eyes at least. And this also carries over to Gibraltar, where Void is still allergic to Zarya, but I mean, I guess it's a little more okay here, being that it's more of a possibly dive centered map if you want, but overall, like, Elsa seemed to be doing very well on their Zarya, but I don't know, man. It's still really frustrating for me to watch it back. So on first point, Hunters made really good rotations early, making sure that they out-rotated the dragons before they took the high ground. And even though they had tanks and a tracer, which is a lot of fucking mobility, they seem to have a really distinct lack of cart pressure, which really surprised me, because typically, if you don't know, the, I guess, kind of standard is you have, regardless, either your Diva or your Tracer, in most cases, push the cart to the bottom corner of what's called blue box, which is where is obviously the most traditional place to hold on Gibraltar. And after you get it to that corner, you're fine. You can go do whatever the hell you want. But up until that point, it's in a really rough spot, because any person that is, like, on cart is immediately on a, like, lower ground than anyone else. And not to mention the amount of angles that you can get, like, looked at. It is rough if you don't get it to that corner, but the dragons didn't really seem to care about that, and I want to say Hunters might later, but we'll get to that when we get there. And for finally some good news from Dragons fans, the Nisha got pinched really fucking hard on first, which I thought was really well executed from the tanks, even though it didn't seem like Fate really cared about pinching. It was more good on Void, but I'll guess give them both credit. On second point, Dragons really struggled to take off angles early, and I believe DM was even fucking pushing cart for a bit, but due to the lack of off angles, like, it was really bad for them to maintain cart pressure. But at the same time, Monk also was, like, in a really bad spot that ended up giving them an initial pick that opened the second point up really wide for them, which, I mean, is traditional. It's Gibraltar second. Third was a little different, because DM had a really good angle on third and was really proactive about taking angles, as opposed to Izayaki, who really just felt like hugging cart instead and didn't really have an angle as soon as the fights really started, and I think was really bad for the team overall. The second fight on third, Fate got picked very early and Trance was blown. But then again, Gaga came out big dicking and immediately just started going on to, I believe, Izayaki in the backline. And the double tank ult re-engage was actually really well played in my opinion, but if you wanted to be nitpicky, I can see how you could think it's an overinvestment. There was also really good dive denial on the, I believe, third fight from both Elsa and Leave. They fucked over Fate. Fate tried to jump on high ground with I believe Void and Diem, but he was the only person that got denied, and I have never seen an Ashe get destroyed, rezzed, and then destroyed again. I forget why the hold from Hunters initially gets broken, but the Valk res that Nisha tried to pull off was pretty flashy, but it wasn't really practical in terms of you know, actually recontesting. It was very like, you know, let me get this off, and then as soon as both of them die, they're just in objectively worse positions, which was very unlucky to watch. Gaga did really well on Gibraltar overall, but if we're sticking to the current time that I'm talking about, Gaga did an amazing job of trading backlines in particular, and even at one point made LJG swap to Brig specifically to mark him. And the very last fight was very hard to watch because I believe Jimmy, Nisha, and Gaga all kind of got killed maybe like 3 seconds apart from each other, which is literally the like perfect storm for the most perfect staggered rugged touch ever to exist ever. So after the Dragons full cap, we go back to Hunters attacking, and the Dragons, from what I saw, did a really good job of denying Monk from immediately rotating, but also made Monk swap to Zen, which, you know, later down the line may start to be a little bit of a detriment to them, because that's kind of his one trick. It's also worth mentioning that Void's allergy to playing Zarya finally did some good in denying that Jimmy went Widow almost instantly off the start, and kind of just got shut down from the Sigma. But outside of that, it's still Sig on Gibraltar, man. I'm not too sure about it. So first fight was going really well for the Dragons until Leave found Fleta in their backline and marked him insanely well, which I was very impressed by. I was impressed by Leave a lot throughout this series. But that mark in particular, and if you go back and watch the VOD, you'll see it, and you will not be disappointed whatsoever. It was a beautiful way of Leave was trying to take high ground, I believe, and Fleta was sitting around on top of the Mega on first, and they kind of ran into each other and took a 1v1, and it ended up actually snowballing first point. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. For the rest of first, there was a lot of neutral downtime in between fights, which was a little disappointing to see and very lame, but it was I don't know, there was really weird stuff. But moving on, there was a really weird mixture of getting not a lot of value with Flux on Void's end, as well as Izayaki being bullied on Zen when he was in, I believe, control room, and got booped out on the cart and just annihilated by Gaga. Second, for some reason, Fate feels the need to turbo in and hard jumps in for no reason, and just ints away the second point for the most part. And outside of that, I mean, ult economy also played a factor in this, but ultimately the Fate really aggressive jump was really what got the ball rolling for Hunters, and the ults were just kind of there to pad it a little bit. And getting on to third point, it's Holy shit. The recontest for this point, I don't think I have seen a faster one. I guess somehow Fate ended up on top of Spaceship and immediately jumped on the point. Everyone else dove in with him, and it was a really good pincer move, and I can at least respect the recontest. But ultimately they had to fall back, and while falling back, I believe DM and Izayaki both were really afraid to get high ground, and even like while they were not rotating for it, Jimmy ended up getting a pick onto I believe Fleta, while again Izayaki and DM were just not marking Jimmy whatsoever. But also, in the same fight that Fleta got picked first, Hunters ended up using like 5 ults in one fight, which is definitely an overinvestment. But I mean, if it's what you want to do to stop momentum, fucking sure, dude, why not? It's do whatever you want, man. But they did get a couple of ults out, being like, I think the support ults as well as bomb from the dragons, so it wasn't all for nothing. They at least traded some ults, and eventually I believe had Valk for the recontest at least. I also do not want to undermine how good of a job Gaga did, because Gaga did a great job of also checking Fleta every once in a while, and what I mean by that is just kind of like rolling into Fleta, making sure that like Fleta knows that he exists and that Fleta wasn't able just to flank, go do whatever he wants, and would occasionally get marked by Gaga. And I think that's a really good quality to have in especially a main tank. After a little bit of trading, Monk ultimately gets a really good pick onto DM, and after that it kind of just rolls the ball and really quickly snowballs third point. So going all the way back to first, Fate swapped a ball after a little bit of time on Monkey and immediately got marked by Gaga, which I was super impressed by actually. Seeing that Gaga immediately took it upon himself to go make sure that Fate wasn't able to get an engage off or just in general do anything. Fate, the only time that Fate came in to fight, he instantly died over a span of a minute in terms of their time bank, which is crazy to think about, especially because you think about how much I guess uptime ball really should have. But I mean, like, Gaga played this absolutely fucking great, and also the dragons they C9'd, which was it was pretty funny. So now for Hunter's attack, finally. The presence at the very beginning was very slow. Again, you really want to get it to that corner. But ultimately, I think that was almost where the end goal was. So it was a little rough to get it through there. But even, like, it was just really rough getting it even through the first choke, if I remember correctly. But eventually, it was all down just to time, and ultimately I think what Chengdu did better than anything throughout the series was trading backlines. And like any time that like Jimmy would get dove or Monk would get dove, you know, sure as hell Izayaki was getting a like ass load of it from Gaga and Leave back and forth. So, with that all out of the way, I wanted to swap up kind of the ending of how I guess finished these, because first off, I wanted to bring up that the person who got the MVP for this match was Monk, but watching back at the VOD, Gaga fucked the entire time, and I think his like level of play went super under the radar. And I'm incredibly impressed by him and can't wait to see more. But I guess now with that out of the way, I want to kind of talk about really how I think about their, I guess, team in terms of the Dragons, because like they're so weird now, and I don't know if it's just this meta that's causing them to be so weird, or if it's just the allergies that fucking that Void apparently has for Zarya is like incredibly, like, just horrible. It's making them lose so many fights, or just lose in the neutral fight, because they don't have that extra oomph to help their Winston. And I feel really bad for him, to be honest, because this puts a bad taste in your mouth if you're a Shanghai fan. But I'm not, so I don't really care. I appreciate all of you for watching this video. If you want to see more shit like this, I tend to only do these on teams that get really, like, badly upset, but I'm, I guess, willing to expand a little bit more if there's a series that someone thinks is really good or that I should take a look at. Again, thank you so much for watching the video. I appreciate the fuck out of all of you. And ultimately, I think this series doesn't really set a good precedent for how the dragons are going to be in the future, but unless they for some reason just forgot how to counter swap other people and overall are just very slow to realize what their win conditions are, my bad, then I don't think this is gonna look like the same dragons we saw, but I can always be wrong. So with that in mind, if you want to keep up with when I upload, I always post it on Twitter @Demented, so follow me there, and I can always tweet out whenever I upload. And I think other than that, I'm fucking so hyped to be making content again. Actually, it's been an amazing feeling already. Okay, no more bullshit. I appreciate the fuck out of all of you, and as always, I will see you when I see you. Later.